welcome to the House of zk Radio, which is a focused podcast and media channel exploring everything zk, zero knowledge. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for the intro, and very excited to be interviewing Porter here today, who's a core contributor at Matter Labs. So thank you so much, Porter. And I'm wondering, just as a first question, if you could give an introduction of yourself. So maybe your origin story of how you got into the Web3 and the ZK spaces.
Yeah. So it actually started when I was pretty little. I thought that like one of the coolest things you could do was like codes and code breaking. And so I got very into cryptography like just as a kid. I would watch like the World War II movies and cheer for Alan Turing and like breaking the Enigma. And I was like, if I could do that full time, I would do that. And yeah, it finally, like I had a few career changes and eventually made it to Matter Labs, where I started on the security team, like finding all of the bugs in our ZK for zkSync, which was a very fun, like perfect role for me. So that was awesome. And then recently I've switched because we need much more help on like the marketing and like DevRel side. And so now I'm like doing more of like talking to the ecosystem about all of zkSync's cool tech.
Nice. And yeah, The Imitation Game is actually one of my favorite movies, so really relate to that. But yeah, that's awesome to hear. And just wondering, because now that you're also focused on and zkSync as well is focused a lot on the dev experience, I'm wondering if you can bring some light into some of the main challenges that come with developer adoption and why we haven't seen as much mainstream adoption with ZK specifically for developers.
Yeah, I think it's been tricky. Like there were actually predictions from like Dan Benet at Stanford that like it would take like a decade before like ZK like EVMs would be ready, and turns out like they came much sooner than anyone expected. And at least for zkSync, like when we were originally building this thing, like it was still quite difficult. Like the original engineers are legendary, and like so for zkSync we had to do things like not be completely EVM equivalent. We had to like, there are a couple parts of the EVM that are like very hard to prove in ZK, and so we made some trade-offs like early on. Now ZK's gotten so good that that's actually like not as much of like a necessity anymore. Like you actually can prove the full EVM, and so like I think the developer experience is going to get like much better now. It was just hard to build ZK initially, and now it's better, and now we can focus more on like not just making things work in a basic way, but making things work nicely.
Yeah, so really optimizing for that developer experience. And you did mention about EVM equivalence, which I know that zkSync is starting to have plans to release like later this year. So I'm wondering if you can also touch some light onto what that really implies in achieving that full EVM equivalence.
Yep. So if you've been a developer on zkSync, you know like one of the biggest pain points is like certain opcodes and certain pieces are just not quite the same as Ethereum. And so if you like fully want to copy paste your app, that doesn't quite work. And especially if you're trying to build like the same app on like 100 different chains, you don't have time to figure out like the minute differences that you need for zkSync. And now we are adding EVM equivalents. It's really going to be like 2 upgrades back to back. The first one is just an EVM interpreter, which is sort of like added on top of the current like stack that we have. And this is good, but it's going to be a little more costly than doing it in like a natural way. And the real end goal is for the next version of our proof systems called zkOS, and that is going to allow us to do like full like EVM like proving normally. So it should be like much better and cheaper then.
Got it. And I'm also very curious to hear, because you've also had some extensive experience within cryptography in general, so not just ZK, but also with some other cryptographic primitives. I'm wondering just on your thoughts of, first, like the ZK endgame. Do you really think that, like personally, we will have an endgame for ZK, or will we perhaps see a combination of multiple cryptographic primitives becoming more dominant? Like, for example, we're hearing a lot of talks about MPC, about FHE. So do you see ZK dominating, or do you expect that there will be a combination of a few?
Yeah, I think like cryptography by itself has really gone through like a new revolution recently, where like really like public key encryption came in like 1976, and there was like RSA, and hash functions, and like pretty much that was like good enough for like 40, 50 years almost. And then really like Zcash was the first one to really use like zero knowledge proofs in practice in like 2012, 2013, I think. And that I think is like what I would call like the start of like the second wave of like interesting cryptography coming along. And so zero knowledge proofs, yeah, fully homomorphic encryption, multi-party computation, like all of these like cool things are like now being like researched and like actively like used again. We're kind of lucky that like blockchains like made all of this relevant. And so I think that I think ZK is going to be absolutely everywhere. There's not just like within blockchains and rollups, but also like ZK TLS, ZK email. Like we're going to just prove almost every single thing that happens on the entire internet. But then there's lots of cool like further like cryptography things. So yeah, more cryptography is good.
Yeah, nice. And I do like how you mentioned that we will begin to see ZK be integrated into real-world use cases. So not just within blockchain ecosystems, but then also, like what you mentioned, ZK TLS, even ZK email. So we'll see ZK being a very dominant force in the future. I'm also curious to hear about your opinions on the current state of rollups that we have today. So I'm wondering if you can shed some light on in your opinion, some of the biggest challenges surrounding our general purpose rollups today.
Yep. So first of all, like rollups, like full like EVM rollups are still very new. Like optimistic rollups are only like 2 or 3 years old. zkSync Era launched like a year and a half ago. Like this is pretty new technology and it's going very fast. So like I think initially there was a lot of just like let's try and get these things working. And now that we're working, I think the two big directions that are happening are interoperability between the different rollups, so you're not like on an island, and then like speed, which I think it's kind of funny. It'll be like a race between the L1 blockchains that optimize for speed first, and now they're going to try and like add ZK later, versus like the ZK rollups who like built the ZK first, and now we're going to try and optimize for speed. I think like people are coming at it from different angles, but it's all converging on like super fast, super scaling, super cheap. It's going to be cool.
Yeah, so we see trends in just focusing on the interoperability and also the speed. Yeah, and I also just relating to zkSync Era, I know that you guys have plans for later this year for decentralizing your sequencer. I'm wondering if you can speak about the implications of doing so and what kinds of advantages that will bring.
Yeah, I think the sequencer specifically might be more than the year, so don't push me on engineering timelines. But like the goal is to like fully decentralize zkSync Era. I think like we want to inherit like all of the security properties of blockchain, and like we have to do this the right way. Like we're not sure how many other teams are going to like fully lean into decentralization. Because of like our founders' backstories, and like everyone at zkSync just really believes in the mission of like giving people like an individual's control of everything. And so just for the mission's sake, even if like, you know, economically, like you don't want to decentralize the sequencer because like look how much money Base is making. Why would Base decentralize the sequencer? Like you can kind of make these like temporary short-term arguments for why like it won't happen, but we're just going to decentralize anyways because of like the values and the importance to the space.
Mm-hmm. So really catering to the main mission that you have there. Yeah, I like that a lot. And just going back to a bit about the developer experience within zkSync Era, I'm wondering if you could maybe provide a walkthrough of the developer experience specifically on Era, and then also maybe some of the pain points that developer-specific pain points that you're addressing.
Right. So the mostly it is just take your Solidity code, compile it with the zk solc, like the zkSync compiler, and mostly your code should just work. We're adding the EVM equivalents later, which will help, but it's kind of been a pain for like the first year and a half because like it's not just that you have to use a different compiler, but since our bytecode is different, you have to use a lot of different tools. So you can't use Foundry regularly. You have to use our fork of it called zk Foundry. And like all of these kind of minor headaches, like each one is maybe not too bad, but like overall, you don't want to have to go through all of them. So like I think developer experience is something that we are like pretty heavily focused on right now because it's really been like, I'd say zkSync's biggest weakness, but should go away in the next like 6 months, I think.
Got it. And also very curious because you were previously part of the security team as well. So I'm wondering just on your perspectives of some of the security considerations within zkSync Era, and then also if there's any sort of best practices for developing secure apps on Era as well.
Yeah, so zkSync spends a ton of money on security. Actually, right now, shout out, there's a $500,000 contest on Cypherin for a lot of our new like interoperability contracts that you should go check out. In general, yeah, security for all blockchain, I think, is like absolutely insane. Like, there's nothing that compares to like Ethereum going through the merge. I think that is probably the biggest software upgrade on like a live production system of all time. Like, if you just think about like hundreds of billions of dollars of value, one software change, and like potentially like it breaks, it's all gone, you mess everything up. And zkSync like also has like a lot of money on our chain. If you like mess anything up, it's like drastically bad very soon. And so there's a ton of efforts between like we do internal manual audits, we get external auditors for everything. We also work on things like formal verification, and just in general, we have to be like super careful and try and have like backups for any like single points of failure. That's security is like very intense but very fun.
Got it. And I also wanted to dive into more of that interoperability aspect. So specifically with zk Chain, I'm wondering if you can just speak about some of the differences that zk Chain offers over, say, traditional bridges that we have.
Yep. So this is, we're kind of marketing it as no bridges, mostly because it's abstracted away from you. It's kind of like built into, we're calling like the elastic chain is like the term for all of the different zk chains together. And like our interoperability, I think, is very strong. There's like some optimistic approaches to interoperability, which basically require you to run a node for every chain that you want to interoperate with. So if I want to be interoperable with 20 other chains, I have to run like 20 different nodes, like 20 different computers, and this is like quite bad. Like, you're not really scaling like at all. And also, like, if I want to be interoperable with Base, like, am I going to get Porter Chain? Like, is Base like team going to run Porter Chain's node? Probably not. So like I think it's going to be challenging for some other teams to be like as interoperable. So zkSync's approach is like more proving to the other chains that like messages have been sent and transactions are included. And so it's more like one-to-one instead of just like broadcasting to everybody. And this will make it much easier for us to like be decentralized, be permissionless. Like it's a much stronger security guarantee too. Like if one thing breaks, it doesn't break everything else. So I think like our interoperability is like really cool. And it's gonna be awesome once it's here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very excited to see that as well. And just wondering how it compares to that multi-chain approach as well, and how exactly the native interoperability can be enabled from Elastic Chain.
Yeah. So like at a high level, it's just if you have chains that have very similar like protocol stacks, you can build like very tight interoperability between them. And then if you want to compare between like Elastic Chain interoperability and like Polygon Ag Layer or something, you can still have some interoperability between them, but it might be slower or like not as a little more like expensive. I think long term we'll find like the best interoperability approaches, and all of Ethereum will start to adopt the same standards. But for now, I think a lot of the teams are experimenting with what's best, and so it's exciting to see like the different ways. But I think Elastic Chain's approach is like pretty great.
Mm-hmm. And also very curious to hear about the kind of the architectural components that are involved in Elastic Chain as well, and how they kind of coordinate with each other, relate to each other. Yep.
So originally, or like the way it works today is essentially like we built zkSync Era, and it is a whole like L2, and then we added like Chronos chain as like a whole L2, Abstract's going to be a whole L2, and they're kind of just isolated right now. What the Elastic Chain will look like from like a technical perspective is sort of shared contracts on the L1, and then a sort of shared like gateway layer, which is what's going to sort of like intermediate it's going to aggregate a lot of the proofs, so like zk proof aggregation, but it's also going to help send messages between the L2s without having to go through the L1, which is like slow and expensive. And so it's kind of those two pieces, like the L1 contracts and then a gateway, like sort of very minimal piece, just enough for like interoperability between all the zk chains. And then still, like at the application layer, it's going to look all the same for each chain.
Got it. And I also wanted to transition into the zkSync VM, so something else that you guys offer within the zk stack. So I'm wondering, basically, like what that entails. So how does zkSync's VM is incorporated into the zk stack, and what the components look like in there?
Yeah. So this is because it was hard to build like a perfect EVM back in the day. We have what we call Era VM. I think it's like poorly named, but because it's used for more than just zkSync Era. But the Era VM is close, but not quite the same as the EVM. I'd say another like main drawback is that we designed the proof system to be like exactly the same as the VM, which means that like every change that we make to the VM, if we try and want to be like a little more Ethereum compatible, we also have to change the proof system in like the exact same spot. And so this like at least doubles the amount of work. It's probably more, and it's a huge pain like to make any changes. And so that's why like what we're aiming for with zkOS, which is the next version of our proof system, is just to have a regular RISC-V zkVM, and then you can have your like EVM code in Rust or something and just compile it to RISC-V, and this way like protocol like EVM changes will no longer require proof system changes. You can like change each on their own without them being like dependent, and that's going to be like way nicer for security, cheapness, users, better like faster upgrades. We can add more precompiles, like tons of reasons. zkOS is going to be nice.
And not having to change like the underlying proof system, but making like similar adjustments. Okay, yeah, I think that really does help with the developer experience as well. And also wondering about, because I remember you mentioned that zkSync is also, in regards to its proof system, also having plans to change from Plonk to Flonk as well. So I'm wondering if you can share some of the like motivations and also the thinking behind why you decided to make that change.
Yep. So I think we're actually on like the 5th or 6th version of our proof system already, from the origin of Matter Labs and zkSync Lite and moving onwards. So we started with more of like a pure Plonk-based proof system. Then it kind of became Plonk-ish, where it's kind of a variation. About a year and a half ago, we upgraded to Boojum, which did Fry proofs wrapped into Plonk verification. And then I forget when the paper came out, but there's basically a new paper called like FF-Flonk or Flonk that essentially is just a better way to do a Plonk verifier. And FF comes from fast Fourier transform. Essentially, the trick is that with Plonk, you have to verify like several different polynomials. And with FF like Flonk, you can kind of like interpolate all of the polynomials together and then just like prove one polynomial. And so this is going to lead to cheaper verification on chain. So this is like directly going to affect our like Ethereum proof verification costs. We actually still keep like the Fry proofs the same at the sort of like top of the proving stack, but as we like wrap the Starks into Snarks by the end of it, like FF-Flonk is going to be like the cheapest way to verify in Ethereum. So that's what's next upgrade should be in like a month or two.
Oh, okay, so coming up very soon. I'm wondering also if there's any kinds of trade-offs between the different proof systems that you guys previously incorporated, and you mentioned some of the advantages, but also curious to hear any potential limitations, any potential trade-offs that come with it.
Yeah, the challenge with the pure snark approach of Plonk and like some of the other snarks is that a lot of them are based on elliptic curves, which have like very sort of static sizes. So you can't really optimize like if you want to tweak it so it's like a little faster for the prover and a little harder on the verifier, or a little like easier on the verifier and a little harder on the prover. It's like you can't really make too many changes to the protocol because elliptic curves, like there actually aren't that many of them that like fit all of the properties that you want, and so like they're kind of tricky to work with. That's why like more and more teams are adopting Fry, because when it's just hash based, it's very easy to tweak the parameters so that in our like foolproof recursion tree, like at the first layer, we optimize for being like very fast for the prover. And then like in later layers, we can optimize for being like harder on the prover, but better for the verifier. So that by the time we get to Ethereum, we've made it like, we both started with easy for the prover and end with easy for the verifier. And then you kind of get like the best of both Snark and Starks that way.
Got it, got it. And also very curious to hear about some use cases that you're excited about. And you previously talked about like we'll be beginning to see some more like applications beyond those in the blockchain context. Like you mentioned zkTLS and you mentioned zk email. Are there any sort of applications being built on zkSync or just ones in general that you're personally very excited to see?
Yes, the one I'm by far most excited for right now is Clave Wallet adding zk email to do account recovery. So today, if you lose your private key, your money's gone. And like when you like Google like crypto user experience, like this is cited as like the #1 like big challenge is like you lose your private key, you've lost all your money. This is really hard for a lot of users who like aren't as familiar with this technology. A lot of money's been lost this way from like Bitcoin over the years. What Clave and zk email are doing is you can, like for the new user experience, it's just going to be, I've lost my private key, I'll send one email to the chain and prove it, and then my account gets recovered. So this is like the full like Web 2 like password recovery, like just like, oh, I forgot my password, click one email and I'm back. And yeah, with like account abstraction, you just have your like money and like a wallet that's set up for this, and like any time that a proof comes that you've sent a recovery email, it'll just move it to a new wallet for you. And so I think this is like completely crazy because first of all, it uses like zk and like a bunch of math and the protocol like zk email, like very like advanced technology, but then the user experience is just like infinitely better because now like you can like reset your account with email, which is like super beautiful. So.
Yeah, and I had no idea about that as well. So you're incorporating zk and all the kind of hard cryptographic security with there, but then also having an optimized developer experience or user experience. And I feel like even those who are not, say, Web3 natives can interact with this, which is pretty powerful.
Oh yeah, I mean, like for my grandmother, there's no way I'm gonna get her to remember a private key. But if we can have like an email reset where if she sends an email and I send an email and like my dad sends an email, then like we can recover my grandmother's funds and like keep her safe on chain. Like that's so much nicer than trying to get her to keep a private key, a seed phrase or something.
Yeah, super convenient. Definitely can help fuel that mainstream adoption as well. And just as a last question before we close today's session, I'm wondering if you have any sort of advice that you'd like to give to our audience, or if you'd like to kind of make any announcements on behalf of zkSync.
Yeah, I think I mean for zkSync, the big exciting upgrades to look forward to are EVM equivalents, elastic chain interoperability. I think like when those two, and eventually zkOS, and with those 3 upgrades, I think our tech's going to be like completely amazing. More generally for the audience, I think like zk is still like pretty early stages. Like I think cryptography, zk, FHE, like and multi-party computation, all of this stuff is going to like completely take over the world. I've been saying for a while, I think like zk will be like as big as AI, or maybe like all of the new cryptography will be like as hot of a topic as like artificial intelligence is. And so I think like now's still a really good time to like, you know, change your career, get into zk, come work in the field. Like there's tons of cool applications and things to work on, and like it's a really exciting space. So come check it out.
Yeah, very exciting time indeed that we're in. Perhaps zk will be even bigger than AI. We'll see. But yeah, thank you so much, Porter, for this interview. I really liked hearing both your vision and then also kind of the technical components there, reasoning behind your design considerations. Very lovely conversation, so I appreciate that. And thank you all for attending as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.